Welcome, dear listener, to another bedtime story with whispers of the night. Tonight, we'll travel to a quiet village where a single bell carried more than sounded, carried memory, kindness, and hope. This is the story of the bell that touched hearts, a gentle tale woven with the warmth of community, the hush of rain after a storm, and the timeless music of love. Before we begin, take a moment to settle into your space. Find a comfortable position, whether lying down or resting back against your pillows. Allow the outside world to slowly fade and let this time be yours. Tonight's story is here to bring you comfort, ease, and a path toward peaceful sleep as you listen. You might notice your breathing becoming softer, your body loosening with each word, and your mind drifting gently like a lantern floating down a quiet river. There is no need to do anything, no need to hold on to thoughts. Just let them drift away and let the story guide you into calm rest. So, close your eyes if you haven't already, and together, let's step into the village where the bell is waiting, ready to share its song. Before the story begins, let us take a few minutes together to gently prepare for rest. Start by bringing awareness to your breath. Notice the way the air enters your nose or mouth, cool and light, then softens as it fills your lungs. Exhale slowly, as though releasing the day into the quiet night. Let your breathing find a steady rhythm, unhurried and natural. With every inhale, imagine drawing in calm, and with every exhale, imagine letting go of tension. Feel the weight of your body sinking gently into the mattress, safe and supported. The day is behind you, and nothing is asked of you now except rest now. Let your attention move slowly through your body. Begin with your toes, softening them, letting them relax completely. Your feet, ankles, and calves grow heavy, sinking deeper into comfort. Move upward your thighs, hips, and stomach loosening, releasing the last of the day's effort. Feel your chest expand and soften with each breath, your shoulders melting into stillness, your arms and hands resting effortlessly at your sides. Let your neck grow long and free, your jaw unclench, your eyelids heavy and warm. Your whole body is now softened, like a wave gently ebbing back into the sea. If any thoughts arise, let them pass like clouds across the sky, drifting further until they dissolve. You are here, in this moment, resting in stillness. Now imagine you are in the quiet village at night. The air is fresh after rain, carrying the faint scent of earth and wood smoke. Lanterns flicker in windows, casting golden halos on the cobblestones. You hear the distant song of the bell, soft, low, and comforting, rolling across the valley, wrapping the village in peace. As you stand in the glow of this sound, you feel connected to the world, to yourself, to every gentle moment that has carried you here. The bell's voice whispers, not only to your ears, but to your heart, telling you it's safe to rest, safe to let go. Let yourself breathe into that sound, that peace, and drift gently on its echo, as if it were cradling you toward sleep. bell that touched hearts. The silent tower. The village where Iris lived was small enough that its rooftops could be counted on one hand, yet old enough that every stone seemed to carry the echo of a story. At its heart rose a tower, tall and weathered, its stones softened by centuries of rain and lichen, where a great bell once lived. Everyone knew the tower by a single name, the Silent Tower. For as long as Iris could remember, its bell had not sung. The villagers said it had lost its magic. They spoke of it with a shrug, as though speaking of something too far gone to matter. The baker, brushing flour from his sleeves, would shake his head and mutter that rust had eaten the bell's voice away. The cobbler, polishing boots in his shop window, would say it was only an old story best forgotten. And the schoolmistress, with her spectacles low on her nose, would tell the children that bells grew old just as people did, and eventually grew tired of their purpose. But long ago, the bell had not been silent. Long ago, when its voice rolled through the air, it had carried more than sound. It was said that the bell's toll could steady the weary mend quarrels, call the lost home, and stir hope in hearts that had grown heavy. When it rang, children would run to the square with laughter spilling from their mouths. Lovers would clasp hands a little tighter, and even the oxen at their yokes would lift their heads as though reminded of their strength. Its sound was not only heard but felt, like sunlight moving through the air. That was how the elders remembered it, and that was how they told the story to those who would listen, though fewer and fewer did now. The bell was silent, and silence has a way of settling in like dust, soft and convincing until it feels permanent. Children no longer played at the tower's base. They said it was too still, too empty, a place where echoes felt heavier than laughter. Even the pigeons that nested in its crevices seemed to coo with a quieter restraint, as if honoring the bell's hush. But Iris was different. She was not a child who dismissed silence. She was a child who listened to it. She listened to the way rain patterned against glass, how the wind shifted before dawn, the faint vibrations of moth wings brushing lamplight. Her mother sometimes called her the girl who hears what others forget to notice. And so, when Iris walked past the tower and tilted her face upward toward the window where the bell slept, she did not feel that she was looking at something empty. She felt, instead, that something inside was waiting. One autumn evening, as the sky lowered into peach and lavender, she paused at the base of the tower. The ivy stirred gently in the wind, and above it the silent bell caught the last curve of sunlight. It glowed faintly, like an ember too shy to reveal itself. Iris stared at it for a long time before whispering, "Why won't you sing?" The words slipped from her mouth like a secret, almost as if she feared to disturb something sacred. The pigeons shifted, wings rustling softly, and the tower settled into its familiar silence. Yet Iris felt that the bell had heard her. The silence no longer felt indifferent. It felt like a pause, like breath held in waiting. That night, she asked her grandmother about it. Her grandmother's hair was silver, her eyes lined with years of watching seasons pass, as if pulling something from the deep drawer of memory. The bell, she said softly, was never just a bell. It was given to us long ago by travelers who were not quite of this world. They left it so our village would not be forgotten. each toll carried farther than you could imagine across rivers, over hills, even into the corners of dreams. Iris's eyes widened, catching the glow of the fire. But why did it stop? Perhaps because people stopped listening. Magic, my dear, only lives where it is welcomed. If hearts grow deaf, even the strongest song fades. Iris tucked those words deep inside herself, like a lantern she could carry. If the bell was waiting for someone to listen, then perhaps she could be that someone. Perhaps it did not want to be forgotten. Perhaps it wanted only to be believed in. The very next day, she returned to the tower. The wooden door groaned in protest when she pushed against it, the sound like an old man waking from slumber. Inside, dust floated in shafts of light, each speck suspended as though time itself had slowed. A spiral staircase wound upward, its steps worn smooth by the many feet that had climbed them in years gone by. No one had climbed them recently, but Iris did, each footstep echoing faintly as if the tower itself remembered her presence. She climbed past landings that smelled of hay, damp stone, and something faintly metallic. At last, she reached the chamber where the bell hung. It was larger than she had imagined, nearly twice her height. Its bronze surface was darkened with age, tinged with green where time had kissed it. Yet when the light struck at the right angle, there was still a glimmer, a stubborn shine dot. Iris stepped toward it slowly, as though approaching a sleeping creature. Her breath caught in her chest. She lifted her hand, hesitated, and whispered instead, "Hello. I think you're waiting for someone. I don't know if it's me, but I can try to listen." Her words trembled, but sounded braver than she felt. The bell gave no reply, but Iris thought she sensed something like the faint hum beneath silence, the ghost of a heartbeat waiting for permission to be louder. She pressed her palm gently to its cool bronze surface, closing her eyes. She could almost feel it in her bones, though the air remained still. She walked to the narrow window beside it and looked out. From here, she could see the whole village, the red and brown roofs clustered close, smoke rising in soft ribbons from chimneys, children darting like swallows through the square, merchants calling out their trades. To them, the tower was only a shadow among familiar streets. But from this high place, it felt like something more. The thought filled her with a longing for something she had never known but already missed. Turning back to the bell, she whispered, "I believe you can sing again. I'll come back every day if that's what it takes. I'll wait with you." It was not a grand vow, not the kind told in great stories. It was small, quiet, made by a girl to an old bell in a forgotten tower. Yet, in the hush of the chamber, it felt as though the words mattered. As her hand lingered against the bronze, the light shifted, and for an instant she thought she saw it shimmer, like a faint breath caught within. And perhaps, in some hidden way, the bell believed her too. When Iris descended the winding stairs, smoke curling into the sky, but she felt as though everything had changed. She carried with her a secret, not of silence, but of a silence that was listening. She had heard it, and she had answered. That night, as she lay in bed, the room dark, but for the faint spill of moonlight, she thought again of the tower. She thought of the bell, its quiet weight, and the shimmer of something waiting. The silence no longer felt like an ending, but like a song held in its first breath. With that thought, Iris closed her eyes and drifted into sleep, dreaming of bronze. voices, and unseen wings. The first ring the morning after Iris made her quiet promise to the silent bell, the village awoke as it always did. Roosters crowed from behind wooden fences, shutters creaked open as if yawning with the houses themselves, and the marketplace began to fill with the shuffle of baskets and voices. But for Iris, the day carried something different. She woke with the memory of cool bronze beneath her palm, the shimmer she thought she had seen, and the certainty that the bell had been listening. That thought filled her chest with a restless kind of courage. And before the sun had fully climbed into the sky, she was already on her way to the tower. The door groaned when she pushed it. The spiral stair greeted her with dust and silence. And still she climbed, each step echoing as though the tower were listening to her. When she reached the chamber, the bell stood waiting, vast and still, like a giant with a secret. The rope dangled from its heart, frayed at the ends, but strong enough to hold. Iris stood beneath it, looking up, her hands trembling. She had never pulled a bell rope before. She had never called a song out of metal and silence. For a long time, she simply watched the rope sway slightly in the draft that breathed through the window. Then, slowly, she reached for it. Her fingers curled around the worn hemp, rough against her skin, and she felt the weight of Ita, weight not only of wood and metal, but of years, of silence, of the villagers' disbelief. She thought of her grandmother's words, magic only, lives where it is welcomed. Closing her eyes, she whispered, I welcome you. If you can still sing, please let me hear it. She drew in a breath, braced her feet, and pulled Dot. At first, nothing happened. The rope creaked, the bell shifted with a reluctant moan, and Iris's heart faltered. Then, all at once, it moved. The clapper swung, struck the bronze, and the chamber filled with a sound so soft it seemed impossible that such a great bell had made it. It was not the loud, booming toll she expected. It was a single, trembling note, golden and tender, as if the bell had woken carefully after a long sleep and was testing its own voice. The sound shimmered through the tower, down the spiral staircase, and out into the square below. It did not crash or command. It drifted like a sunbeam laid gently over the village rooftops, threading itself between chimney smoke and resting on doorsteps. It slid into kitchens where quarrelsome words had been gathering like storm clouds and turned them into sighs. It brushed against the baker's weary shoulders and softened his frown. It found two children squabbling over a toy and made their hands unclench, laughter slipping back in place of anger. It touched the heart of a widow who had sat too long in silence, and for a moment her lips curved into the first smile she had worn in days. The bell's golden note did not last long. It hung in the air like a feather, glowing, then dissolved into silence again. But the silence that followed was different now. It carried warmth in its belly, like the hearth after a fire has burned low. Iris stood with her hands still clutching the rope, her breath caught. Her eyes were wide, her skin tingled, and for a moment she could not move. Then slowly she let the rope slip from her fingers, swaying gently as though still remembering the sound it had called forth. She pressed a hand to her chest, where her heart beat too quickly, and whispered, "You're alive." Below, in the square, villagers looked up toward the tower. They shaded their eyes against the light, puzzled. "Did you hear it?" someone asked. "The bell?" "No, it couldn't be." They shook their heads, trying to dismiss it, yet their quarrels had softened. Their frowns had eased, and some part of them knew something had passed through. The cobbler looked toward his wife with gentler eyes. The baker gave a bun to a hungry child without counting coins. A neighbor who had long avoided another raised a hand in greeting. They would not admit it yet, but the bell's golden note had touched them. Iris lingered in the chamber, watching the sunlight catch on the bell's bronze. It seemed brighter now, as though pleased to have spoken again. She dared to reach up and stroke its side with her fingertips, whispering, "Thank you." She felt a warmth beneath the cool metal. Not heat exactly, but a thrum like something alive. For the rest of the day, she walked through the village carrying her secret. She saw the softened faces, the small smiles, and though no one spoke of the bell, she knew. She wanted to shout it, to tell them the silent tower was not silent anymore. But something in her heart told her it was not yet time. The bell was fragile, its voice still waking, and to speak too soon might smother the spark before it grew. So she said nothing. She only smiled, holding the secret close. That night, lying beneath her quilt, Iris thought again of the sound. She replayed it in her mind, that soft, golden note, not booming, but tender, as if the bell had spoken directly to her first. She wondered if it had meant to, if it had chosen her, or if she had simply been the one willing to listen. As she drifted into sleep, the echo of that single note seemed to follow her into her dreams, where it unfolded into 1,000 possibilities. Fields bathed in sound, rivers carrying music, skies stitched with song. The days that followed grew curious. Each morning, Iris returned to the tower. Each time she pulled the rope, the bell gave a little more of itself. The first time had been soft, like a whisper in sunlight. The second was stronger, a clearer golden tone that lingered longer in the square. By the third day, the villagers could no longer pretend not to hear. They stopped in the streets, paused in their chores, looked toward the tower with brows furrowed in wonder. Some whispered, "The bell is waking." Others muttered, "It's only the wind catching the rope." But no matter what excuse they made, they felt it. Disagreements quieted more quickly. Kindnesses appeared in unexpected places, and laughter rose like a forgotten language returning. Still, Iris did not reveal herself. She let the mystery belong to the bell, not to her. She came quietly, climbed the spiral stair, pulled the rope, listened to the golden note bloom and fade, and left with her heart lighter each time. The bell was speaking again, and it was enough to know she had been the one to ask it first. There were evenings when she lingered in the chamber, her hand pressed to the bronze, whispering to it as though to a friend, "You are not forgotten. I believe in you, and I think the others are beginning to believe too." Sometimes she thought she felt the bronze hum under her touch, as if the bell was answering, though in a language she could not yet understand. The villagers grew restless with curiosity. They spoke of the tower more often, glancing toward it when the golden note drifted across the square. Children asked their parents why the bell had begun to sing again, and the parents only shook their heads. The schoolmistress, who once said bells grew old, now whispered that perhaps some things are never truly lost. The cobbler no longer muttered about rust, and the baker found himself humming as he kneaded dough. The silent tower was no longer quite silent, and the village was no longer quite the same. For Iris, it was the beginning of something she could not yet name. She knew only this: the bell had waited, and she had listened. Its song, faint and fragile, had returned, and in returning, it had softened hearts. And deep inside her, she felt that the bell was not merely a bell. It was a voice of something greater, something old and kind, and it had chosen her to help it be heard again that night. As she watched the stars from her window, she thought of the rope, the bronze, the shimmer of sound that had spilled from silence. She thought of the way quarrels had eased and smiles had bloomed, as if the bell's voice had stitched invisible threads of peace between people. She pressed her cheek to her pillow and whispered, "I'll keep ringing you, I promise." The tower, silhouetted against the night sky, seemed to nod in quiet agreement. And though no one else heard it, Iris thought she caught the faintest golden hum drifting through the darkness, like a lullaby only she was meant to hear. The songs of memory. The bell did not toll with thunder, nor command with authority. It simply breathed into the morning air, and yet, in that breath, the quietest miracles began to stir. The note hung in the village like golden smoke, as if sound could weave itself into threads and curl through rafters, slip between shutters, and rest on the shoulders of those who least expected it. The villagers paused, sometimes without knowing why. A spoon lingered above a bowl. A child stopped mid-loaf. A dog pricked its ears, sensing something beyond its understanding. The sound did not stay at the surface. It traveled inward into the hushed chambers of memory, where time is folded and kept safe. There, like a gentle hand brushing dust off forgotten shelves, the bell awakened pieces of lives that had long been sleeping by the shore. Where nets still dripped from the morning catch, a fisherman sat with aching hands. The years had thickened his fingers and lined his face with salt and sun. For as long as he could remember, the sea had spoken to him, sometimes rough, sometimes kind, always endless. Yet, when the bell rang, it was not the sea he heard. It was his father, the memory, rose unbidden, like a wave that does not ask permission. He was small again, curled on a straw mat in their wooden hut. Outside, the storm raged, rattling shutters and pulling at the roof. His young body trembled with fear, but then a voice, low and steady, filled the darkness. His father's lullaby. The words were simple, almost nonsense, but the rhythm carried the warmth of safety. A tune shaped not for performance, but for reassurance, stitched together from the roughness of a fisherman's throat and the tenderness of love. The man blinked at the soundless sea before him. Tears pricked unexpectedly at his eyes. He had not thought of that song in decades. His father had long since returned to the waves, leaving him with boats and burdens. And yet, in the shimmer of the bell, the lullaby was alive. He could almost hear his father's hand tapping gently against the rhythm, almost smell the brine of wet rope, almost feel the weight of being protected, utterly and completely. He bowed his head to hide his trembling lips. "Thank you," he whispered. not to anyone visible, but to the bell that had shaken loose the voice of the man he loved most at the heart of the village. The baker was pulling loaves from the oven. The air was thick with warmth, a blanket of yeast and crust that clung to the skin. His mornings had always been measured by the rising of dough, the crackle of firewood, the steady rhythm of kneading. The bell's note slipped in between his motions, and suddenly the world around him shifted. The warmth of the oven no longer belonged only to today. It became a bridge to the past. He was not the master baker with flour-dusted hair. He was a boy again, no taller than the counter, staring wide-eyed as his mother, apron tied snug around her waist, lifted steaming loaves and broke them apart with her hands. The memory was vivid, the sound of crust tearing, the soft steam rising like little clouds, the way she always smiled before giving the first piece to him. It wasn't just bread. It was joy shaped into nourishment, the daily miracle of hunger answered with kindness. He laughed suddenly, a sound that startled the apprentice at his side, for in that moment he remembered the reckless glee of stealing crumbs, the playful scolding, the way bread tasted when love was baked into every fiber. He had been baking his whole life, yet he realized how often he had thought only of customers, of trade, of routine. He had nearly forgotten the seed from which all of it grew. The bell reminded him. Bread was not only food, it was memory, gift, celebration. He placed the newest loaves gently on the wooden counter, as if they, too, carried laughter, waiting to be shared. And Iris, standing within the tower, hands still trembling from the rope, felt the sound ripple through her in ways she could not contain. Her mother's face rose before her, not as a painting on a wall, not as a shadow of grief, but alive, shimmering in sound. She remembered evenings when the two of them sat by the fire, when her mother would tell her stories that grew taller than the mountains and wider than the rivers. Her mother's laughter always came at the wrong places in the tale during serious kings, during solemn quests. It would spill like sunlight through a crack, unstoppable, bright. That laughter had been her compass, her shield, her favorite song. And then, one day, it had been gone. But now the bell carried it back. She could hear it in the resonance, in the way the note curved and softened, in the way her chest lifted against her will. She could almost believe her mother stood beside her, smiling at her clumsy grip on the rope, teasing her for taking things too seriously. Her throat tightened. The bell was not just a sound, it was a vessel of memory, and through it she was not alone. Though none in the village spoke of science that day, the truth lingered beneath the magic. Sound has always been a key that fits hidden locks. It does not merely enter the ear, it vibrates within the body, weaving through bone and blood, stirring parts of the mind that sight alone cannot touch. A single tone can trigger pathways in the brain, long unused, opening doors where dust has settled. Music, psychologists would one day say, can awaken even those lost deep in memory's fog. The bell, in its pure and resonant note, was like a spark against tinder, and memories, once kindled, burned softly but surely, warming hearts long thought cold. The villagers, of course, did not speak of neurons or resonance. They only felt the truth of it. That sound can carry memory like a river carries fallen leaves downstream, around bends, until one day it returns to the shore of the listener. One by one, across the cobblestones and fields, more memories blossomed. A seamstress paused at her needle, recalling the way her grandmother's hands guided hers, steadying every stitch. A boy sitting idly on the steps suddenly remembered the time his lost dog came bounding back after days away. The bark, the rush of joy. An old man, half asleep on his chair, awoke with the image of his wedding day petals falling, music in the air, the taste of happiness so sharp he almost laughed. The bell became a chorus, though it rang only once, for each listener heard a different harmony, drawn not from the air, but from within themselves. And yet, somehow, it bound them together. Their memories, though private, created a shared silence, afterward a silence filled with understanding. Neighbors glanced at one another with softer eyes, as if they now knew that behind every face lived a treasure chest of stories, laughter, grief, and love. As Iris stood within the tower, she felt herself at the center of this awakening. The bell was not hers alone. It belonged to the whole village, perhaps to the whole world that could hear it. But she also knew something more personal. Her mother's laughter had not died. It had not faded completely into silence. It lived inside her, waiting only for the right sound to call it forth. She touched the rope with reverence, whispering a promise to herself. If one note could do this, then she would ring the bell again and again, not to summon villagers, not to mark hours, but to remind them of what they carried within. The sound eventually faded, dissolving into the morning air, but like a fragrance caught in fabric, its echo remained. People moved again, hands returned to work, feet shuffled along the streets, yet their movements were different, softened by invisible threads of memory still humming within them. The bell had sung, and the village had remembered. And above them all, in the tower, Iris smiled. Through her tears, she felt lighter, though nothing had changed except sound. Perhaps that was the secret. Memory, once awakened, gives the present a gentler weight. The songs of memory had begun, and Iris knew, deep in her chest, that the tower was far from silent. It was alive with voices of the past, waiting to be heard. The heart of the bell. The tower was quiet now, though not empty. Silence seemed to hum faintly in the stone, as if the air still carried threads of the golden note the bell had loosed into the world. Iris rested her hand on the worn rope, her fingertips brushing over the rough fibers as though she were holding a pulse. She did not move, not yet. She simply listened to the faint echo that might have been memory or might have been imagination. The bell was more than metal. She knew it instinctively. Each time it rang, it seemed to spill something far larger than itself, something warmer than bronze and brighter than resonance. She had felt her mother's laughter return to her through its song, had watched neighbors' eyes soften as hidden memories rose from its tone. The bell was not just a bell, it was a vessel, and Iris longed to understand what it truly carried. She let her gaze wander across its surface. The bronze was old, but it glowed faintly where light touched it, as if time had polished it rather than worn it down. The carvings along its rim were not the simple marks she had once dismissed them to be. Now, staring closer, she noticed how uneven they weren't the precise etchings of a craftsman's chisel, but the wavering, deeply personal scratches of many hands. She traced one mark with her fingertip. It was crooked, a little clumsy, almost like a letter. Her breath caught. The bell was not the work of one alone. It had been touched by the village, by countless villagers, long ago, who had left their small, imperfect inscriptions. Some lines curved like initials, some resembled shapes of stars, some seemed like hearts half hidden in abstraction. They were not decoration, they were contributions. Each mark carried the weight of someone who had lived, someone who had dreamed, someone who had wanted to leave a piece of themselves in the sound. A memory of her grandfather returned to her. His stories of the bell's forging, always told in half whispers by the hearth. She had thought them fairy tales at the time, but now the truth began to breathe within them. He had said that when the bell was cast, each family brought something of their own small trinkets, coins, heirlooms, even locks of hair to be melted into the metal. They had poured not only copper and tin, but their hopes and prayers, their grief and their love. He had claimed that the bell carried the village's very heart. Iris pressed her forehead against the cool bronze. She could feel the faint vibration still lingering within, as though the bell were alive. The stories were not myths. The villagers had given their dreams to this bell, and in return, it gave back its voice, woven with memory, heavy with kindness, shaped by generations. She sat down upon the wooden floor of the tower, her hands still resting on the rope as she let her thoughts flow. It explained why the sound had touched them all differently. The bell did not speak with one voice, it spoke with many. Each note carried 1,000 threads, reaching into hidden corners of the heart, weaving them into song. That was why the fisherman had heard his father's lullaby, the baker his mother's bread, she herself her mother's laughter. The bell had not invented those memories, had released them, carrying the hidden seeds planted long ago by those who had forged it. It was not the voice of metal. It was the voice of the village. She thought of the seamstress, the boy with his lost dog, the old man who smiled like a bridegroom again. Each of them had been touched by the sound, and now she understood why. When the bell rang, they were not simply hearing an echo, they were hearing themselves, their families, their ancestors, the collective heart that had been melted and melded together in fire long before Iris had been born. Her chest tightened as she realized the weight of what she had touched. To ring the bell was not only to mark time or call attention, it was to remind the village of who they were, of what they had once promised each other. It was to awaken the love that had been poured into the bronze. It was to carry the heart of the people and return it to them in sound. The thought filled her with reverence, but also with fear. Could such a task belong to her, a girl who had only stumbled upon the rope in longing? She had pulled without knowing the power she was summoning. What right did she have to hold the heart of the village in her hands? Her doubt was broken by a sudden warmth. She looked up at the carvings again, and for a moment she swore the symbols shimmered, the crooked letters, the uneven stars, the simple hearts seemed to glow faintly in the slanting light. Perhaps it was only her imagination, or perhaps the bell was reminding her this heart was not hers alone to carry. It was shared. It had always been shared, and now she too was part of that lineage. Another hand added to the circle. She placed her palm gently against the bronze and whispered, "I understand." A breeze slipped through the tower window, lifting her hair, It carried the scent of bread from the baker's shop, the tempts of sea salt from the fishermen's nets, the faint perfume of wildflowers from the fields. Each fragrance was a reminder of the people below, the living continuation of those who had forged the bell. The village was breathing with her, and the bell was its steady heartbeat. The longer she sat in that silence, the more she realized how alive the tower felt. Every creak of wood, every flicker of shadow, every soft draft seemed part of the same rhythm. She imagined the day the bell had first been cast, glowing red with molten metal. She saw villagers gathered around the fire, faces bright with anticipation. She heard the murmurs of prayers, the soft cries of children, the solemn words of elders. She saw them dropping their tokens into the glowing liquid rings that no longer had fingers to wear them, coins that had lost their value but not their meaning, charms that had guarded travelers. She saw mothers whispering blessings, fathers pressing their palms together, children giggling as they drew small shapes to be etched into the rim. The bell had been born in fire, but raised in love. Its song was not only sound, but memory fused with hope, carrying the weight of lives that had long since turned to dust, yet remained. Iris's heart ached, but not with sorrow. It was a swelling ache, the kind that comes when one realizes they are part of something far larger than themselves. Her mother's laughter, the fisherman's lullaby, the baker's breads in a vast tapestry, and the bell was the loom that held them together. She thought then of the future. Someday, children not yet born would hear the bell and awaken to memories of their own, memories not even made yet. Someday, her laughter might shimmer in the bronze, waiting to return to someone who needed it. Perhaps that was the truest magic of the bell. It was not bound to the past. It carried forward as well, gathering hopes yet unspoken, dreams yet unshaped, and promising to keep them safe. The thought comforted her, like a hand resting gently on her back. She stood slowly, her palm still pressed against the metal. She no longer felt fear in her chest, only gratitude. She had discovered the secret. The bell was not just the voice of the villagette, was the heart that never stopped beating, even when people forgot to listen. As she gazed out from the tower window, the village stretched below her, bathed in the soft glow of morning. She saw neighbors greeting one another with unusually warm smiles, children chasing each other with laughter still ringing from their earlier memories, an old man leaning on his cane with a gentler step. The bell had reminded them all, and she knew she would carry that knowledge with reverence. The rope swayed gently in the draft, almost inviting her to pull it again. She did not yet. Some sounds must rest, so that when they return with greater power. Instead, she let the silence hold her, a silence filled with voices she could almost hear, whispers of dreams melted in fire, laughter etched into bronze, promises sealed in sound. The bell had spoken, and Iris had listened. Now she knew the truth fits. Voice was not made of bronze, but of people. It sang because they had given themselves to it. It resonated because it carried their kindness, their love, their grief, their memories. And so it would always sing, for as long as there was a village to listen. She smiled softly and whispered once more to the bronze, "You are our heart." And the silence seemed to agree, pulsing with warmth, as if the bell itself was listening to her in return. The night of silence. The day began with whispers of unease, though no one could name their cause. Clouds gathered in the east, piling high and heavy, pressing against one another until the sky itself seemed to sag under their weight. The air felt close and restless, heavy with a silence that pressed into the chest and made every breath feel stolen. The villagers glanced upward now and then, speaking in hushed tones, as if to disturb the sky would provoke it further. By dusk, the storm broke. It came without mercy. Winds howled down the streets, rattling shutters and slamming doors. Rain crashed like waves upon the rooftops, drumming its own chaotic rhythm. Lightning forked above the sea, so bright it turned the village white for an instant before plunging it back into darkness. Thunder rolled over them all, deep and unrelenting, shaking the very earth beneath their feet. And through it all, the bell did not ring. Its silence was sharper than thunder. For days now, the villagers had grown used to its voice, the gentle, golden tone that had drawn memories from their hearts and softened the edges of quarrels. Its absence was a hollow in the storm, a gap that no other sound could fill. The villagers listened between thunderclaps for its song, but none came. The silence stretched, and in that silence, old shadows stirred. Arguments rose where laughter had been. A fisherman accused another of stealing nets. Children squabbled, their games collapsing into tears. Neighbors closed shutters, not only against the storm, but against one another. It was as if the very thread that held the village together had frayed, and in its place, fear seeped back like cold water. The storm outside was mirrored within, each house rattling with tension, each heart growing heavier in the absence of the bell's voice. Iris sat at her window, her candle guttering in the drafts that slipped through the cracks. She could hear the anger in the streets, the sharp words carried on the wind. She pressed her palms together, trembling, for she too felt the weight of silence. Since discovering the bell's secret, she had come to believe in it with her whole being. Its voice was more than sound. It was the heart of the village. But now that voice was gone. Her thoughts circled endlessly. Had the storm damaged the bell? Had the silence broken its magic? Or had the heart of the village itself faltered, leaving the bell empty? She could not rest with questions gnawing at her. She looked toward the tower, its silhouette barely visible, against the flashes of lightning. It stood firm, though the storm clawed at its stones, and within it the bell hung waiting. She knew what she had to do, pulling her cloak tight around her. Iris slipped into the storm. The rain struck her face like thrown pebbles, cold and stinging, but she kept her eyes fixed on the tower. The wind tried to shove her back, catching her cloak like a sail. Yet she leaned forward, every step driven by something larger than fear. The streets were empty, doors barred, windows shut, but she felt as though the whole village watched her, unseen, hoping someone would do what they themselves dared not. At the tower's base, the great wooden door groaned under the strain of the storm. Iris pushed with all her weight until it yielded, creaking open into darkness. The spiral staircase loomed above, damp and glistening, each stone step slick with rain that had forced its way inside. She began to climb, her hands clutching the railing, her breath loud in her ears. The storm followed her through the cracks, moaning around her like a warning. Higher and higher she climbed, until her legs burned and her cloak clung heavy to her skin. At last, she reached the chamber of the bell. Lightning split the sky just beyond the windows, flooding the room with violent light. The great bronze shape hung silent, looming in the flicker, its carved marks gleaming wet. Iris felt her heart squeeze. How strange to see it still, when her mind remembered its voice filling the air like sunlight. She stepped forward and placed her hand against the cold metal. It did not vibrate as it once had. It stood mute, heavy, almost lifeless, yet she knew it was not gone. The bell carried the heart of the village, and hearts may falter, but they do not vanish. They can be reminded to beat again. She gripped the rope, her knuckles pale in the lightning's flash. The wind screamed through the windows, tugging at her hair, but she set her feet firmly and pulled with all her strength. The rope resisted, at first heavy with strictness, but she leaned her whole weight against it until at last the clapper swung. The bell rang. Its voice was nearly swallowed by the storm. Thunder cracked, wind roared, rain hammered, but the note pushed through, steady and golden, rising above the chaos like a single star refusing to be hidden. It carried into the night, slipping between gusts, threading through the thunder, reaching ears that strained in silence. In their homes, villagers paused, a child stilled mid-tear, hearing the echo of a mother's lullaby. A quarrel between neighbors halted mid-word, their anger dissolving as the tone reminded them of bread shared long ago. Fear loosened its grip, replaced by something gentler, older, more enduring. The bell spoke again, and the village remembered. Iris clung to the rope as the bell swung, her body swaying with its rhythm. Each pull drew the note louder, richer, more insistent, until even the storm seemed to falter, its fury paling beside the purity of the sound. Lightning flashed again, but instead of terror, Iris felt awe, as if the storm itself bowed to the bell's voice. She laughed, then, a breathless, tear-streaked laugh, because she felt her mother's laughter within the sound, and with it, the laughter of countless others. The bell's voice spread like warmth in cold rooms, like firelight in darkened halls. It threaded through memories once more, but this time, it did more. It bound them together. People stepped outside, despite the rain, drawn to the sound. Neighbors who had quarreled minutes before now stood side by side, heads lifted toward the tower. Parents pulled their children close, whispering comfort. The village, fractured by fear, began to mend. In the tower, Iris felt the shift. It was as if the bell itself grew lighter in her hands, its voice flowing not from her strength, but from the unity of those below. She realized then that she was not ringing it alone. Every memory, every kindness, every hope the villagers had ever given to the bell was pulling with her, pushing against the storm. She was merely the hand that reminded it to sing. The storm raged on, but its power no longer frightened them. Against its fury stood the voice of the bell, unshaken, unwavering, and in that golden sound, the village found its courage. They remembered who they were, a collection of frightened houses, but a community bound by love and memory, carried in the bronze heart that tolled above them. When at last Iris let the rope rest, the final note hung long in the air, stretching into the silence after thunder. The storm began to move on, its winds lessening, its rain softening, its fury spent. The clouds thinned, and in the distance, a pale slice of moonlight broke through, silvering the rooftops. Iris sank to her knees, breathless, her hair plastered to her cheeks. The bell loomed above her, silent once more, but no longer empty. She pressed her palm to the floor, feeling the steady calm that had replaced the storm's tremors. She whispered into the stillness, "Thank you." Down below, the villagers lifted their faces to the clearing sky. They did not speak at first, for words felt too small, but their eyes carried gratitude, and their hearts carried the reminder the bell had given them. Slowly, they drifted back into their homes, but now they carried warmth with them, like embers from a shared fire. The night of silence had passed. The bell had spoken again, and with its song, hope and unity had been restored. And in the tower, Iris sat with the rope still in her hands, knowing that storms would come again. But so too would the bell's voice, as long as there was someone to pull the rope and believe in its heart. The song beyond the storm. The storm had passed, but the air still trembled with its memory. The sky hung heavy with silver-gray clouds, their edges tinged faintly by the promise of dawn. Puddles glittered in the cobblestone streets, lanterns flickered softly, and the scent of rain lingered in every breath. The bell in the tower, though damp with the storm's fury, stood proud and steady, and Iris, though her hair was tangled by the wind and her clothes damp from the climb, stood beside it, her heart still thrumming with the echoes of what she had done. The night of silence had broken, and the sound she had pulled from the great bronze heart of the bell still shimmered in the memory of the villagers below. For in that moment of ringing against the roar of thunder, against the fear in people's hearts, the sound had carried not just music, but something far deeper: courage, comfort, and a reminder that they were not alone. Now, as the storm retreated into the mountains and the restless hush of after-rain settled, the bell's song began to ripple outward in ways Iris could not yet see. Down in the village, people emerged slowly from their shuttered homes. Children peered from behind their parents' skirts, eyes wide and shining. Farmers leaned on their doors, inhaling the clean, wet air with relief. The innkeeper swept water from his porch, humming the faint trace of the melody that still lingered in his ears. And the baker, who had feared his bread would spoil in the damp, found himself smiling, his heart unexpectedly light. Though the storm had passed, its silence had taught them something. The absence of the bell's voice was unbearable. They had not realized how deeply they had come to lean upon its presence, how much its song had bound them together. When it was gone, fear had risen like weeds in a field. But when Iris's hands pulled the rope, when the bronze throat of the bell opened and sang, they had felt their unity return like sunlight breaking through the darkest sky. The memory of that moment would not fade quickly as dawn slowly stretched her fingers across the horizon. Villagers gathered at the base of the tower. They looked up where Iris stood against the paling sky, and for a moment, no one spoke. They simply gazed at her, the girl who had faced the storm and dared to climb where none else had. Their silence was not emptiness, it was reverence, a wordless recognition of what had been done. Neighbor to neighbor, friend to stranger, parent to child, they linked palms until a circle grew at the foot of the tower. It was not Iris who asked them to do it. It was the bell. The song that had poured through the storm had carried something more powerful than melody. It had reminded them of their own bond, the invisible threads that tied them together. And as the circle closed, as laughter and tears mingled in the morning air, Iris felt the sound of the bell move again, not as a note ringing in the tower, but as a vibration within their joined hands, as warmth in their hearts. The bell was singing still, but now through them. From that day forward, the villagers began to see the bell in a new way. No longer was it only the tower's guardian, a bronze sentinel perched above their roofs. It was their voice, their collective heart, the vessel of their dreams and memories. Every time it rang, they no longer heard just bronze upon bronze, but the layered echoes of their own lives woven into its tone. When a child was born, parents would listen for the bell and imagine it carrying the first laugh of their newborn into the sky. When lovers clasped hands, they would smile at the bell's toll, as though it celebrated with them. And when grief settled upon the village, as it must, from time to time, they allowed the bell to hold their sorrow and transform it into something tender, something bearable. It became not just the sound of the village, but the sound beyond the village. Travelers passing through paused in wonder when they heard it. They could not explain why the notes felt different, why the tone seemed to resonate not only in their ears, but in their chest. Some said it was a trick of the valley's acoustics. Others whispered that the bell was enchanted. But those who stayed long enough to listen knew the truth. It was not magic of bronze or wind, but the weaving of human hearts. And Iris, once a quiet girl who climbed the tower out of curiosity and longing, became its keeper, not by decree, not by ceremony, but by the unspoken trust of everyone who looked at her. She was the one who had touched the bell in the storm, who had refused to let its voice fall silent. From that day on, the villagers knew that whenever Iris stood in the tower, the bell's voice would never fade. Her days took on a rhythm, gentle as the turning of seasons. At dawn, she climbed the winding steps, her fingers grazing the cool stone walls, and stood beside the bell as sunlight warmed its surface. She did not always ring it, for silence too had its place, but she touched its side and listened, as though it carried whispers even when still. At midday, she sometimes guided children up the steps, teaching them to listen not just with their ears, but with their hearts. And at dusk, when shadows stretched across the fields, she rang the bell softly, sending its voice drifting with the wind to remind the villagers of home. Yet Iris also knew the bell was not hers alone. To the generations before and those yet to come, she saw herself not as owner, but as guardian, its caretaker, its listener, its voice when storms came. And so, the story of the bell spread beyond their valley. Travelers carried it with them, tales of a village where a bell sang not just notes, but memories, where its keeper was a girl whose courage had turned silence into unity. These stories moved from town to town, across rivers, over mountains, into places where fear and quarrels sometimes grew unchecked. And in those distant places, people remembered. They remembered the idea of a sound that could hold a community together. And they sought to create songs of their own, whether by bells or by voices raised together, or by simple acts of kindness that rippled like music. Thus, the bell's song reached farther than its own sound could carry, And in the quiet hours of night, when Iris sat by the window of the tower, watching the stars gleam above the dark fields, she wondered at this truth. The bell did not belong only to the village anymore. It belonged to the world. Its music traveled in ways unseen, through stories, through memories, through the bonds of love and hope. There were still storms, of course, seasons of hardship, quarrels that rose between neighbors, grief that shadowed the village, but never again was there silence. Even when the bell was still, its presence remained in the hearts of the people. They had learned that its true music was not the bronze note. As twilight painted the sky with rose and lavender, Iris stood beside the bell and placed her hand upon its surface. She thought of her mother's laughter, the lullabies of the fisherman's father, the baker's joy, the whispers of lovers, the cries of newborns, the laments of the grieving. All of it was inside, shimmering like threads of light woven into the metal. It held their stories, their love, it would hold them forever. And as the first star appeared above the horizon, Iris pulled the rope. The bell's deep, resonant voice unfurled into the night, rolling across the village. Villagers paused where they were, some in their homes, some in the streets, some resting from the day's labors, and each felt the note rise within them. They smiled, they wept, they clasped hands, and beyond the village, travelers heard the sound and carried it onward, whispering of a bell that could sing of love. The music rippled outward, endless and enduring. It moved across valleys, over mountains, through forests, into the hearts of strangers who would never see the tower but would still feel its gift. And within the tower, Iris closed her eyes and listened, knowing she was only one keeper in a long line. That one day another would stand where she stood, ensuring the bell's magic never faded. For the song beyond the storm was not hers, nor the village's alone. It was the world's song now, carried in every act of kindness, every joined hand, every heart that remembered. And as long as even one person listened, the bell would never fall silent again. Thank you for joining tonight's story with Whispers of the Night. May the music of the bell stay with you as you drift into sleep, carrying calm into your dreams. Rest well and good night.